Hey there fellow coders, welcome back to another exciting tutorial. Today we are diving into a crucial aspect of modern web application, JWT based authentication and authorization in a Spring Boot application. Here what we will cover: setting up Spring security for JWT integration, creating and validating JWT for secure user authentication, implementing authorization mechanism based on user roles, best practice and potential pitfalls to watch out for. And the best part, you don't need to be a security expert or Spring guru to grasp these. Whether you are just starting or a seasoned developer, this tutorial breaks down JWT authentication and authorization into easy to follow steps. Let's master JWT based authentication and authorization together. Before starting to code, let me give you a small summary of JWT. JWT stands for JSON Web Token. So, what exactly are JWTs? Think of them as compact, self-contained JSON objects that securely carry information between different parties. They are like digital passports for your data, ensuring it's verified and trusted. Here's how they work under the hood. A JWT is like a sandwich made up of three parts: header, payload, and signature. Each section is base64 encoded and separated by dot. Here is an example of JWT. This first part is header that contains metadata like signing algorithm. After header, there is payload. Payload holds the claims, or you can say the data you want to transmit, such as subject, or you can provide your username as a subject here, roles or permissions. Then comes signature, a cryptographic signature that verifies the token's authenticity and integrity. To create and sign JWT, you can use either a secret key like a shared password with the HMAC algorithm or a public-private key pair using RSA or ECDSA. This signature is what that makes JWT a tamper-proof. JWT payload can be encrypted and transferred securely, but most implementations use unencrypted but signed tokens. When a server receives a JWT, it uses the same secret or public key to verify the signature. If it's valid, the server can trust the information in the payload. Let's start by creating a new Spring Boot project. I will use my favorite online tool, that is Spring Initializer. You can go there from start.spring.io. Make sure you have choose Maven project and language is Java. Select latest Spring Boot version. At the time of this recording, it's 3.2.1. Scroll down a little bit. Here, choose package as jar and Java version is 17. I am using Java version 17 because it's the minimum required Java version for Spring Boot version 3. Now it's time to edit the metadata. Change the group name com.helloiftikar. That's my channel's name. Give it an artifact name Spring JWT. Let's leave the rest as it is. Now I will move on and add some dependency. The first dependency I will need, that is Spring Web, because we will expose few endpoints. Then we will need Spring Security, which is main object of this tutorial. Then we need Spring Data JPA because we need to manipulate and interact with the database. Then we need MySQL driver to connect to MySQL database. You can choose other drivers based on your database. Like for Postgres, you can add Postgres driver, or for Oracle, you can add Oracle driver as well. So I'm skipping this because I have added my SQL driver. Now click on this generate button. It will generate and download this project in your computer. Import it into your IDE and start coding. I have opened the project on my IDE. I am using IntelliJ IDE Ultimate version. Here is my project. This is our POM file. Let's open it. Here is our properties defined of our Spring Boot project. Our Spring version is 3.2.1. Here is our artifact name, our group ID, and even our dependencies added. Now let's connect with the database. IntelliJ IDEA has a built-in tool to communicate with the database. This tool is available in the ultimate version only. If you do not have the ultimate version, you can choose free MySQL tool like MySQL Workbench. Just search for MySQL Workbench. Here is the result from Google. From there you can download it and use it for your project. I am going to use my built-in tool here. So to connect with the database, from my IDE, click on this database icon that is from your right sidebar. Alternatively, you can open it from View, Tool Windows and Database. Click on this plus icon to add database connection. Choose data source. Here I am using MySQL. Let's filter for MySQL. This one. Click on this. Now I need to provide our necessary properties for this. I don't need to change the name. Host is localhost. That's okay. My database is running on default port, that is 3306. Now giving my username, that is root, and giving my password. If you're connecting first time, you may need to download the missing driver files. Just click on this download link. It will download the necessary driver for you. Our driver is downloaded. Let's test this connection. Make sure you have got this success message. Otherwise, check your configuration and try to connect to your database. Click OK. So our database is connected. Now we need to create our schema. Right click on this connection. New schema. Let's give our schema a new name, that is Spring JWT. Click OK. That's it. Our schema is created. Now let's move on our new step. We'll now establish the connection between our application and the database we have created. So go to Project, SRC, Main, Resources. Rename this application.properties to application.yml. Open it. This is for representation YML. You can keep the properties if you want. Using YML file for setting up the properties is just my personal preference. To follow this tutorial, it's better to transform it to YML. In order to connect database, we need to provide a branch of properties here. We'll add Spring, then data source. Here we need to provide the URL of our database connection. It is jdbc:/mysql:/. Here we need to add our server address. My server is running on my localhost, so it will be localhost. Then my port is 3306 and my schema name is, let's check my schema name, it is Spring JWT. So Spring JWT. Now we need to provide our database username and password. My username is root and my password, and giving my password. This is my database password. Make sure you provide your correct username and password. Now here we need to provide the driver class name. This will help the Spring to detect and use the best driver class name. Here we are using MySQL, so my driver class name is com.mysql.cj.jdbc.driver. After providing our data source information, we need to add some other JPA properties. So here we will have JPA. Please take a closer look about the indentation here. The indentation of this JPA must be the same as the indentation of this data source. That means this data source is under Spring, and similarly this JPA is also under Spring, and this URL is under Spring data source. If you do not do the indentation properly, Spring will not able to communicate with your database. So after JPA, under JPA, it will be Hibernate and DDL Auto. This DDL Auto have a branch of options. First one is update. That is, whenever we start our Spring application, it will check the table and validate it, and if any changes is necessary to the columns or table, it will do that. In case of create, every time Spring start, it will try to create new table. For our case, I'm going to use create drop. The main usage of create drop is when we start Spring Boot, it will create necessary tables for us, and whenever we stop the application, it will drop the tables. So we'll get fresh table every time we start our project. That is for our development only. When you deploy it in the production, make sure you choose the right one. Giving create drop. Now the new properties I am going to add, it will be under JPA. So this indentation will be the similar as the indentation of this Hibernate. So it will be JPA and show SQL. I want to show the SQL query, so I am marking it true. Whenever the Spring application perform a query, I want to see the query. I also want to add some other properties. So just under show SQL query, it will be properties, that is Spring JPA properties, and now under this properties, it will be Hibernate and format SQL and make it true. I want my query to be formatted. Now at the same level as properties, give database. Here we need to tell JPA that which database we are using. In our case, we are using MySQL. And then we also need to provide the database platform we are using. This will help Spring performing and writing better queries to suit our MySQL database. So for this one, it's org.hibernate.mysql8 dialect. And that's it about our configuration. Let's move on and start implementing our security. When securing an application and implementing authentication and authorization, first thing we will need, that is the user. So let's create our user class. Here within the Java and within our root package, let's create a new package. Right click, new package, give the package name it model, and now inside this model package I will create our user class. So right click, new Java class, make sure you have selected this class. Here name it user, and our user class is created. Let's close this sidebar for make it some room. Mark it with entity. Make sure your entity is from jakarta.persistence. The entity in JPA is nothing but plain old Java object representing data that can be persisted in the database. Now annotate it with table. This table annotation specifies the table in the database with which this entity is mapped. I want it to be mapped with users table in the database. So name is user. Now this user class will have couple of properties. At the first, I want it primary key. My primary key will be type of integer and I'll name it ID. I need to annotate it with ID to let JPA know that this is our primary key. And make sure your annotation is come from jakarta.persistence. Next, we need to tell Spring JPA how the value of this ID will be generated. For this, here we will need to add another annotation, that is generated value. This generated value strategy has bunch of options. First one is generation type auto. This is a default strategy. If we choose this strategy, Spring JPA will choose the best applicable strategy for ID generation for the database. For the generation type identity strategy, it will rely on the database auto increments feature, and alternatively, if we choose sequence, it will rely on a database sequence to generate unique identifier values for our entities. I want my ID to be auto-incremented, so I am going to use generation type identity. Make sure you choose best strategy that is supported by your database. When creating table, this field will be mapped with database of name ID. If you want to change it, you can use another annotation, that is column, and give it a name of the column with which it will be mapped. So let's give it ID. Let's format this code. Next, our user will have first name and type of the variable is string and name is first name. It will also have a last name, so column name is last name, type is string, and name is last name. Then we will need a username and password to authenticate the user in our application. So for the username, column name will be username, type is string, and name is username. Next, for password, column is password and type is string, and variable name is also password. Another property that our user will have, that is role. Like our user may be admin, or maybe agent, or maybe a normal user. So we can assign it using role. So adding a new variable of type role, and here various role is available from various libraries. I'm not going to use any of them. I will create my own custom role. So I'm not going to import anything and give it a name role. Let's create this class, create enum. I'll put it in our model. For the simplicity, our user can have only two roles. One is user and another is admin. That's it. Here we need to give it another notation, enumerated, and the value is enum type. It supports two type of value, ordinal and string. For our case, it's string. So that's it for the class. Now we need to generate the setter and getter. So right click here and generate setter and getter. Select all and click OK. Perfect. Our IDE has generated necessary setter and getter method for our fields. Now let's move on to our next step. For user authentication and authorization, Spring Security uses a special object, that is user details. This is an interface and we need to implement this. I will implement this in our user class. So implement user details. This is from org spring framework.security. This user details interface needs to implement some of the method. Let's implement the methods. These methods are like get authorities, is account non-expert, and many of them. Make sure you have selected all of these and click OK. Here our method is generated. So check those. First one is our get authorities. This method should return the list of roles that our user have. We made our user should have only one role. So in our get authority method, we need to give it list of. Here we will give it a simple granted authority object and pass our role name as parameter, role.name. Our next method is enabled. We want our user is enabled by default. Make this return true. And another is credential non-expired. Take a closer look about this term non-expired, and this is false. This is actually negation, so we need to make it true. And here is account non-locked. This is also the same case, non-locked, so we need to make it true. And another is account non-expired, and this is true as well. And that's it for our user details. Now let's create a repository for doing some database operation for this user. I will name it user repository. To do it, expand this left sidebar. In our Java base package, right click, new, create a new package. Name it repository. Here, to create a new Java class. Repository is a type of interface, so make sure you have selected this interface and make it user repository. And this user repository should extend JPA repository. And this JPA repository accepts two parameters. First one is the class for which we want this repository to work. In our case, it is user. And the second parameter is the type of primary key. So in our user, the data type of primary key is integer. So we need to provide here integer. Let's close the sidebar. Now I will define a method that we will need later. This is for searching the user by their username. So it will be optional of type user. For finding the user, here I will use a querying method provided by Spring, that is find by. After that, I need to provide the parameter after which we want to search, that is by username, and it accepts username. So string username. That's it for our repository. Now let's run the project. Click the start button. Our project failed to start. Let's check what is the error. The error is due to unable to resolve name warg.hypernet MySQL dialect. This seems I provided wrong MySQL dialect. Let's check it, our application.yml file. Here, this is our database platform. Here I have made a mistake. It will be warg-hypernet.dialect.mysql8 dialect. Now let's try to start this application again. Okay, this time this application started at port 8080. It also have generated as random password. It has created our user table, and this is our fields, and our primary key is ID, and this primary key will use MySQL's auto increment feature. That is because we have, let's close this one. In our user class, we have explicitly said that we want to use generation type is to identity. So let's check again by removing this strategy and what happened. Restart the server. Here is our user table. The field is ID. See, no auto increment instruction is here. Instead, it is creating a sequence table which will be used to generate the value of the ID. Let's go back to our previous ID generation type. Stop the project. Check in the console. When we stop project, Spring JP is dropping that users table. That is because in our application.properties we provided detail auto. That is, it will create the table when it starts and drop the table when it stops. So in our user class, let's undo these changes and go back to our generation type to identity. So we have created our user repository and also implemented user details. Now let's move on to the next step. Here I want to grab your attention to another thing. Check these fields of our user class. Here I have not provided any access modifier. So what is access modifier? Access modifiers in Java specify the accessibility or scope of a field, method, or class. When a class or method or variable does not have an access modifier associated with it, Java assigns a default access. The default label of this modifier is only within the package. These cannot be accessed from outside of the package. That means it is package private. So what does it mean? Let me show you. Here our user class in this model package. Inside the package, let's create a new class. Give it a name, demo user. Here define a public method. It will not return anything. So void. Give the method a name, maybe demo. Inside this method, create an instance of user and assign it to user variable. Now let's assign first name user dot. Check this. Here IDE is showing suggestion of first name, last name, role. We can access these field values here directly. We can assign or modify values directly from here. We can assign the first name here, and even we can give our user password directly without calling setter method. So this class is in the same package of the user class. That's why these are accessible directly. Now some other side. Create a new class in the other package, maybe inside repository. Creating a new class inside repository package. Give our class name demo repository. Here again, create a method public void demo. Inside the method, create new user instance, same as before. User equals new user. Now let's try to assign a first name user dot. See, here the first name field is not available in the suggestion. For this class, we need to use this getter or setter method to assign values. For setting the first name, we need to use this set first name method here, and to access the value of the first name, we need to use this get first name method. In this small application, which is only focusing on creating and validating JWT, this does not cause any issues. However, this is not best practice. Even it can cause security leaks of your application if not handled properly. We should specify the access modifiers to these fields. Make this ID private, change the first name to private, and also making other fields private. Now this demo user class is showing an error because this is no longer can access the fields here. Instead, we need to use setter method to set the value. For the first name, it is set first name, passing the text as parameter of the method. We have done with it. Let's delete these classes and delete this demo repository class. For authentication purpose, Spring Security uses another special object named UserDetailsService. To make our development easier, let's use that. Closing the tabs, creating a new package. I will name it service. Inside this service, create a new class. Let's call it UserDetails Implementation, or in short IMP. This class implements UserDetails class. Make sure this UserDetails class is from org.springframework.security. Closing the sidebar to making some room. For the UserDetailsService, we need to implement one method. I made a mistake here. This will extend UserDetailsService, not UserDetails. Remove this unnecessary import from here. Now implement method. This needs only one method to implement, that is load user by username. This method returns user details. If you can remember, previously in our user repository, we have created a method for getting the user from the database. Let me show you. Here is our user repository. Here is the method find by username. I will use it in this load user by username method to get the user by the username. To do this, we need to inject user repository. Private final user repository. Name it repository. Now generate a constructor for making dependency injection. Here inside the method, returns repository dot find by username. Pass the username as parameter dot, or else throw a new username not found exception. That's all for our UserDetailsService implementation. Don't forget to annotate it with service annotation. Now let's move on to the next step. In order to generate, validate, and extract the information from JWT token, we need to include new dependencies within our application. To do this, First, open the browser and search for Maven repository. Go to this site, that is mvnrepository.com. From here, search for JWT. It is showing related dependencies in the search result. From the dependency list, we will need JWT API. Opening it in a new tab. We will also need JWT Implementation dependency, so opening it in the new tab. And finally, we need this JWT JSON extension, so open it in a new tab. For the first one, this is for JWT API. Here is list of available version. Let's select latest one. At the time of this recording, this is 0.12.3. Click here, scroll down a little bit, make sure Maven is selected. Select and copy this text from the text box. Open pom.xml file from our project. Paste the code in this file. Now again, open the browser. Select the next tab. This is JWT Implementation. Select the latest version. Copy the code from text box and paste it in POM file. One more time, open the browser, open the next tab. This dependency is for JWT JSON extension. Copy it and paste it in our POM file. Now we need to click this Maven icon here for updating the changes in the Maven dependency. Or alternatively, we can right click inside the file, Maven, and reload the project. This will refresh and download the necessary dependencies for us. Our dependency is downloaded. Now let's move on to the next step. So far we have created our user model, our repository, and user details service. We also added the necessary dependency for the JWT token generation and validation. Now it's time to focus on token generation and validation. I will create a separate service for this purpose. In our service package, create a new class, name it JWT Service, annotate it with the service. To generate and validate the token, we need a secret key. We will use the secret key to sign the token, and we will also use the same key to validate the token. The key should be at least 256-bit. You need to choose your own secure secret key. But in this project, I am going to use online tool for key generation. From our Chrome, search for 256 secret key generator. Let's select this first result. This will not work for our case. Scroll down a little bit. Let's select this from assecurity.com. Select key size to 256-bit. Click on determine button. Our key has been generated. I will use this hex key. Copy this. Inside JWT service class, create a new variable, private string secret key. Paste the key here. Make this variable final. Now let's generate our token. For token generation, create a public method. Return type is string. Name it generate token. It accepts user. Inside the method, create a new string variable, token. Value is jjwt. This is from io.json web token .builder, then .subject. The username is a subject for our token, so user.get username, then .issued at. Here we need to provide the time when the token is issued. To get current timestamp, new date, make sure the date is from Java UTL date. Here pass system.current time millis for getting current time in millisecond. Then .expiration. Here we need to mention when the token will expire. I want it to be valid for 24 hours. So new date, system.current time in millis. Here we get the current time. With this, add 24 multiplied by 60 for getting minutes in a day, then again multiply with 60 for seconds, and finally multiply with 1000 to get the millisecond value. I made a mistake here. This should be before this closing parenthesis. Now dot sign with. Here we need to provide secret key to sign the key. Let's call get signing key method, which I will create shortly. And finally dot compact and return the token. It's time to create signing key method. This method is private. Return type is secret key from javax.crypto. Inside the method, create a byte array. Name it key bytes equals decoder. Make sure these decoders from io.json web token .base64 URL decode. Here we need to pass this secret key. Finally, return key, that is from io.json web token .hmsc sha key for pass our key byte. It's time to extract a payload or claim from the token. I am creating a private method. Name it extract all claims. It accepts token and returns jjwt parser. We need to verify it with secret key, get signing key, then build parse signed claims, pass our token here, payload. With this method, now we are able to extract the claims. This method extracts all the claims from the token, that is subject, issue date, expiry, all the property will be returned with this method. For extracting a specific claim, for example, I want to access the subject. I am creating a new method so that we can extract a specific property from the token payload. Creating a new public method, making this method generic type, name it extract claim. It accepts token and function from Java UTL collection. The first parameter of the function is the type of the input to the function, and the second parameter is the type of the result of the function. In our case, the first parameter is the claim and the result is a generic type. Name resolver. Inside method, extract all claims and save it in the claims variable. Return resolver dot apply claims. Now let's get the username from the claim. Making a public method, return type string, name it extract username, accepts token as parameter, and returns extra claims, pass our token and claims get subject. Why subject? Because when generating the token, we have added the user in the subject parameter. Now it's time to validate the token. Creating a new public method. The return type is boolean. Name it is valid. It accepts two parameters, token and user. Inside the method, create a new variable, username. Calling extract username method to get the username from token payload, and return if the extracted username is equal to the user's username. Let's change this user to user details. So now if the extracted username is the same as authenticated user's username, then it will return true. Otherwise it will be false. We also need to check if the token is expired. Remember, we have added expiration to our token. So adding a check, logical and is token expired. I'll create this method shortly. Pass token as parameter. Checking if the token is not valid. Checking if the token is not expired. So if these both conditions are true, that is the username is equal to the authenticated user's username and the token is not expired, then this method will return true. Creating this token expired method, return type is boolean, then returns. First we need to extract the expiration time from the token and check if it's before the current date. Let's create the extract expiration method. This is a private method. Return type is date, that is from Java UTL date. Method name, let's copy the name from here and paste it. It accepts token, returns extract claim, pass our token, and we want to extract the expiration time. So claims get expiration. So we have finished coding our JWT service. It's time to create a filter. What is filter? In Spring Boot, a filter is a Java class that intercepts and processes HTTP requests and responses before they reach the controller or after they leave the controllers. It's a powerful mechanism for applying cross-cutting concerns such as authentication, authorization, login, content modification, and many more. Using this, we can check users' credentials and permissions before getting access to the resource. Let's create one. Expanding the sidebar, create a new package, name it filter. Inside this filter package, add a new Java class, name it JWT Authentication Filter. Annotate it with components. I have made a typo here. Let's correct it. Refactor, rename, update the name. It extends once per request filter. I am using this once per request filter because I want this filter to be executed once in every incoming request. This needs to be implemented. Let's implement it. The method name is doFilter internal. Closing the sidebar. Move it to a new line for better readability. It accepts three parameters: servlet request, servlet response, and filter chain. Here the IDE is showing warning. We can remove this by simply adding non-null annotation that is from org.springframework.lang. Doing the similar to the other parameters. Inside this doFilter internal method, add a new variable, data type is string, name it auth header. We need to extract authorization header from the request header, request.getHeader. Name of our header parameter is authorization. Now check if the auth header is null or if the header is not started with BRR. If that's true, we'll not do anything. Just pass the request to next filter of the filter chain using filter chain dot do filter. Pass the request and response. And finally, return. If the header contains the authorization header with a variable token, then we need to extract the token. Token equals auth header. We need to substring auth header. The beginning of index is 7 because we need to skip this text BRR including space, which is total 7 characters long. After getting the token, I need to extract username. For this, we will need JWT service. So let's inject JWT service here. Create a new field, private final, name it JWT service. Now here after token, extract username using JWT service and save it to the username variable. Now we need to check if the username is not null and if the user is not already authenticated. We can check if the user is authenticated using security context holder dot get context dot get authentication equals null. In this case, we need to authenticate the user. We can do this using username password authentication token. It accepts 3 parameters. Check the source. This is the constructor. First parameter is principal. Second one is credential. And the last one is collection of authority. So our first parameter is user details. Credential is null. And the last user details dot get authorities. We need to define our user details variable. To do this, create a new field, final user details implementation, and name it user details. Inject the dependency with the constructor. This still now showing an error. Let's update the name of the user details to UserDetailsService. Now here, after the if statement, new variable user details, name it user details equals UserDetailsService dot load user by username. Let's remove this. Now we need to check if the token is valid. If JWT service dot is valid, it accepts token and user details. If token is valid, then inside this if statement, add a new variable, username password authentication token, name it auth token, equals new username password authentication token. Pass user details. Credential is null because it is token based authentication, and last parameter is user details, and last parameter is user details dot get authorities. Now auth token dot set details, pass new web authentication details source dot build details, and pass our request. And finally, security context holder get context dot set authentication, pass our auth token. And finally, if statement, filter chain dot do filter request response. Here is an error. We need to inject this user detail service using constructor. Remove this portion, generate constructor. Our filter is complete. Now we need to register this filter in our Spring security. We can do this using a bin named security filter chain. Create a new package, name it config. Inside config, new Java class, name security config, annotate it with configuration, and enable web security. Here we need user detail service as dependency. We have implemented it in our service package. This is our service implementation. This name is confusing. Let's change it. Refactor, rename it to user detail service IMPL. Refactor. In our security config, create a new bin, public security filter chain. It accepts HTTP security. I will call it HTTP. It throws exception. Inside the method, return HTTP dot. I want to disable CSRF. So CSRF abstract HTTP configurer disable dot authorize HTTP request inside lambda expression req arrow req dot request matchers. I want all requests to log in and register URL to be permitted. So /login comma register /register permit all. Any other request must be authenticated. After this authorized HTTP request, we need to tell which user detail service Spring needs to use. So user detail service. Here we need to pass our user detail service. Inject our user detail service here. Private final user detail service. Name it user service. We will also need to inject JWT authentication filter. Authentication filter. Now generate constructor. Inside this user detail service, pass the user service. Then session management. Inside parentheses, lambda expression, session, arrow, session creation policy stateless. Then after this add filter before. Here we need to pass our authentication filter. Let's rename JWT authentication filter. Let's rename it to JWT authentication filter. Update the constructor. So add filter before. First parameter is JWT authentication filter. Second parameter is username password authentication filter dot class. And finally build. We will also need password encoder bin for encoding password. Bin public password encoder. Name it password encoder. Return new decrypt password encoder. Another bin public authentication manager. Name authentication manager. Accepts authentication configuration. I will call it configuration. Returns configuration dot get authentication manager. Our security config class is complete. Now it's time to create our controller for handling the endpoints. Create a new package, controller. Inside controller package, create a new class, AuthenticationController. Closing the sidebar for making some room. Add controller annotation. It should be a REST controller. Remove unused import. This controller class will handle login and registration request. For user login and registration, let's create a new service. Inside the service package, new Java class, AuthenticationService. Give service annotation. Declare a new field, private final user repository. Name it repository. Another field, private final password encoder. Another one, private final JWT service. Create a constructor. Our constructor has been generated. Now let's create method for our registration. Creating a public method. Return type is authentication response. I will create this response class shortly. Name it register. It accepts registration request as parameter. Name it request. Inside the method, create a new instance of user. Set user's first name, user dot set first name. Pass request dot get first name. Let's change its registration request to user. Set user last name. Now set username. Request dot username. For password, user dot set password. Here we need to pass hashed password. To do that, use password encoder dot encode. Here, pass our password from request. It's time to set role. User dot set role. Pass user dot get role. And finally, save the user using repository dot save. After saving the user, let's generate the token. String token equals JWT service dot generate token. Pass our saved user here. And finally, return authentication response. Pass the token into the constructor. It's time to create authentication response class. Inside model repository, create a new Java class, authentication response. Add a private field, string token. Generate a constructor to set the token value. And also generate getter method to get the value of token. Now back to the authentication service. Import authentication token class. Now create a method for logging the user. Public authentication response authenticate. It accepts user. For user authentication, we will need to inject another bean here. It will be private final authentication manager. Name it authentication manager. We need to update the controller for newly added field. Let's delete old constructor. Now generate constructor, select all, click OK. Now inside authenticate method, authentication manager dot authenticate. New username password authentication token. Here we need to pass username and password. So request dot get username and request dot get password. Now add a new variable user equals, this is our registered user. We need to get the user from the database. Repository dot find by username. Pass the request dot username. This is showing error. Let's check what's my IDE is suggesting. We need to change it to optional. Let's change it. After that, I will generate the token. String token equals JWT service dot generate token. Pass our user. This is now showing error. Let's fix it. From here, remove this optional and here find by username at dot or else throw. Finally, return new authentication response and pass token. Now back to the controller. Add private final authentication service. Name it auth service. Generate constructor for setting it the value. And post mapping. It is for register. Public response entity. Type is authentication response. Method name register. Accepts request body. User request. This method returns response entity dot OK. Pass auth service dot register. Inside register, pass request. Another post mapping for login URL. Public response entity authentication response. Method name login. Accepts request body. User request. Return response entity dot OK. Pass auth service dot authenticate. Pass request to the authenticate method. So our controller is complete. Let's start the project. Project started. Here new user table is created. To check it, open Postman. Open a new tab. Request type is post. URL is localhost 8080. This one is for registration. /register. Select this body tab. Choose raw. Choose JSON from drop down. Here give our JSON request. First name. Last name. Username. Password. And role. Send the request. Our token is generated. This is our JWT token. Let's check the data in the database. Open the database from the IDE. It's not showing our table. Let's refresh it. Our table is here. Expand it. This is our user table. View the data from the table. Here is our data. This is our password, but the first name is null. Let's check what is the problem. Close this table. Close the database tool. AuthenticationController. It looks fine. AuthenticationService. We are setting our first name and getting the first name from the request. No problem is here. Let's check the request. Here I made a typo. This should be first name. Let's remove the data. Better to restart the application. It will delete the data and will create a new table. Let's do it. Fix the request. Send the request again. Registration was successful and the token is generated. Let's check in the database again. But this time the role is not saved. Check the request. No problem with the request. Here we are setting the role. Why is that? Check the user class. Yes, we have added role setter and getter here. Check the role. Check again the user class. Authentication service. Register method. Here we are setting the role. This should be request.getRole. Restart the server. Send a new request. This time it was successful. A token is generated. Check the data. The first name is here. This is the password, username, and role. Our data is saved. Let's decrypt the token and check it. Copy the token. Open the browser. Go to jwt.io. Scrolling down a little bit. Here, paste our token. Here is our decrypted data, our payload. Subject is the username. This is token expiry time and the time when the token is issued. Now let's check the signature. Here in this input field, I need to provide the secret key so that this can validate our token signature. We have this secret key in our JWT Authentication filter. No, not this authentication filter. It's on JWT service. Here is our secret key. Copy it and paste it in the input box. Now this can verify our signature using our secret key. Now let's try to log into the system. At first, try with a wrong username, password, send request, 403 forbidden. Okay. Let's request with a current username. Correct the username. Send request. Now user authentication is successful and the token is generated. Let's create a new endpoint to check the authentication. Creating a new controller inside controller package. Name it demo controller. Annotate it with REST controller. Get mapping for demo URL. Public. Returns response entity. Entity type is string. Name demo and return response entity dot OK and passing a string hello from secret URL. Now Let's try to access this URL. Restart the application. From Postman, copy the URL, open a new tab, paste it, change login to demo, send request, 403 forbidden. Now let's try with token. We need to register the user. The token is generated. Copy the token. Now in demo request tab, click on authorization. Select bearer token from the drop-down list. Paste the token in the input. Now navigate to body. Send request. Response status is 200. We can now access the secured URL. Now let's do the authorization part. In the controller, adding a new get mapping for admin only URL. Public method returns response entity of string. Give method a name. Returns response entity dot OK. Provide the text that we are going to display. Hello from admin only URL. Now navigate to security config class. Here in the security filter chain method, after this whitelisted URL, we need to configure our authorization. Dot request matchers. URL is admin underscore only followed by slash double star. I want only admin user can access this URL. So dot has any authority. Pass our authority name, that is admin. Restart the server. Now as our user table is recreated, we need to register the user again. First, user with user role. User is created. Copy the token, head to the demo URL tab, authorization, bearer token, paste the new token, send request, it's accessible now. Add a new tab, provide URL for admin only page, authorization, bearer token, copy the token from registration tab, paste it in token input field. Navigate to the body, send a request, forbidden access. That is because the user with role does not have the permission to access this URL. Let's add another user for admin role. Change the username, change role to admin, send request, new user is created. Copy the token, back to the admin only URL, authorization tab, paste the token, back to body, send the request. This time the status code is 200. Admin has permission to access this URL. And with this we are at the end of this tutorial. It's pretty long tutorial. I have tried my best to teach you something that you may find useful. I will be back with a new tutorial soon. If you have any specific tutorial in your mind, drop me a comment. I will make the tutorial on that. Well done and happy coding.